Hey, everybody. Welcome to this edition of V Radio. Today, we're going to be discussing the recent controversy about a nine-year-old kid who dared to wear a headdress and half of his face black. Um, I want to give you guys an opportunity to, share this stream, get it out to people so that more people can join us before I get into this, because I think that the beginning part of what I'm going to talk about here is pretty important. So, um, one of the things, though, that before going to this, just a reminder that on Monday night at 10 p.m. we will be once again welcoming Wendy Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse's sister, to come to the show. I'm going to do that alongside Johnny Walker Dread because we have received some advanced working copies of Kyle Rittenhouse's book. And he says a lot of very unflattering things about his family in the book. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to give Kyle's family an opportunity to give their version of it. So before I get really deep into it, obviously I'm going to wait mostly till that show, but it kind of puts me and Johnny in an interesting situation. Nothing about that will in any way actually be changing anything I feel as far as to all the coverage I've done in the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff leading up to now, because it doesn't change anything. I still believe that Kyle, perhaps not wisely, but not with a negative intent, went to Kenosha to try to, help people and get involved and just be involved in something interesting, like many teenagers do. I still don't feel he had any ill will towards anyone. I still feel he defended himself. That doesn't change the fact that the sudden fame and money that he's been getting doesn't seem to be having a very positive impact on him and his worldview. So tune in to Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and we will be once again hosting them. It looks like Photo Chad may be coming, Grambo may be coming. There's a lot of people that are involved with that whole thing that are actually kind of disappointed in the way Kyle Rittenhouse is acting. So in any case, I gave you guys a few minutes to join. So I got about 7 people right now. Hopefully that shoots up. But one of the reasons I wanted to wait until more people joined was just because there's some kind of critical information that's necessary to understanding the rest of my argument. But I guess I'll come back to it. Most of you guys watch my stuff later anyway. So, all right, let's get into it. The first thing that I would want to discuss when I discuss these kinds of issues is, first of all, I am Native American and Irish. Those are my two primary, background cultures, so to speak, that I've always kind of leaned into. And so over the years, I've had different views on these topics in regards to what they did with this kid. I think before we get into any of that, we really have to kind of look at why is it that people even have school colors, right? Why is it that people have symbols that they pick? And I think that if you really wanted to look at it, you'd have to look at the history of heraldry. And this just happens to be something I know a lot about because one of my hobbies was reenactment and sword fighting competitions and stuff like that. Yes, I wore plate armor and but the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I think it's really important for people to kind of take a look at this, is the fact that the reason why people picked mascots is very similar to, honestly, it pretty much is the same thing as why people would pick their symbols for heraldry. People didn't pick heraldry symbols that were weak. They didn't pick heraldry symbols, that were meant to mock anyone. They picked heraldry symbols to try to personify their family in a strong way. That's why people did this. That's nobody picks one of these symbols to try to mock themselves. And that's what we're kind of being, people are trying to lead us to believe, is that people, doing this, like picking, say the Indians or whatever, are doing it specifically somehow to mock or denigrate people of those tribes, and that's just not true. That's not the motive. Nobody picks their mascot as something that they want to mock. They do it because they want to represent themselves in some kind of positive way. Like my family coat of arms has 3 lions on it. Do you think that they pick that because they're trying to mock lions, or But anyway, one of the things that, this article about heraldry symbols, points out is that since the mid 1100s, heraldry symbols have been used to customize a coat of arms or crest of an individual. The symbols are carefully chosen to depict specific personality traits and goals. So the idea is that if you're picking something for your heraldry, for your family coat of arms, for your clan coat of arms, or whatever it is, it's because you want to appear strong. It's why we put these symbols on our flags. It's why we put these symbols, in lots of different ways. It's also about the colors. Like, when I depict the character that I do, which is a knight, his primary colors are red and black. His symbol is a dragon. I didn't pick a dragon because I want to mock dragons, and that was like kind of the point that I remember, and unfortunately I couldn't find it. That's the other thing, is like when I tried to look for this in Google, it was very hard to find any articles with any positive mentions. But like one of the colleges here in the state of Michigan had a symbol that was the Huron. The team was called the Huron. And of course, the cultural warriors needed to come in and cause problems over it. And it was actually a chief of the actual Huron tribe who was like, no, there's nothing wrong with calling yourself the Huron. Like, that's an honor, right? And you could make an argument that Redskins, or even Chiefs to some extent, could be considered racist because both of those things were sometimes said in a derogatory manner by stupid people. But that's not the intent of anybody who's taking on that moniker for themselves. I use the V moniker because I like the V character, you know, and because I'd like to try to be able to personify some of, what he is. So when people were picking these Native American, essentially symbols for their tribe, because that's kind of what it is, your school is your tribe, they were doing it to try, to personify something that they admire about those cultures. That's what it's always been. That has always been the motive, and nobody talks about this. Instead, we need to reframe everything in any way possible to be sure that you can, maintain a maximum amount of, being offended. And that gives you power. People who are offended in our current culture have power, which is why initially there still are Native American activist groups that are pushing against a lot of this stuff, because they felt honored by it, right? But the new generation, of course, is like, nah, 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 we're going to get a lot more out of it if we just use this as our political fuel to be offended. So, with that said, let's get into what started all of this nonsense, the article specifically. And I want to be clear, I'm reading this article specifically to try to make sure that we get the full story, not because I in any way endorse what this moron is about, that I'm reading is about to say. But there was a African American activist blogger who felt the need to try to call this out. So let's go over the original story, and then we'll get into my arguments about it. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. I see we got like 19 people in here today. Please share this stream. If you can't support me financially, you can really help me just by, getting the word out, because people who do what I do talk about conversations the way that I do. And that's actually something I'm going to be looking into later, because I guess the YouTube files finally dropped. And it's very clear that the government is, in fact, engaged in censorship of anybody who does not toe the line in the way that they want, exactly as they were at Twitter, exactly as they were everywhere else that would go along with it. And the only reason they want to take TikTok down is because TikTok won't play ball. Not that I think TikTok is a good place to be. I do actually believe that the Chinese have nefarious intent with TikTok. But as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, you can't just give your government the right to arbitrarily to decide what they're going to censor. And I honestly believe if TikTok would simply agree to go along with the government controlling what it is and not what is and is not on it, there wouldn't be any conversations about TikTok being banned. So anyway, let me get back to the main point of what we're here to talk about today. So first, we're going to go to the original article and read it. So here we go. From Deadspin, the author's name is ironically Karen J. Phillips. The NFL needs to speak out against the Kansas City Chiefs fan in blackface, native headdress. And then he puts an update in there because, of course, he has to take a victory lap. Now, This in particular is very important because this is the picture that he, of course, chose to use, right? This is just like when they picked a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse very selectively in front of Gage Grosskreutz with Gage's hands up for like 0.3 seconds because they wanted to make it look like Gage was trying to surrender and Kyle shot him anyway. But they showed only this half of this kid's face. And they did this for a very specific reason because the other half is completely red because he was trying to show his team colors, his team spirit. Again, this goes back to heraldry. You would want to match everything to the colors of your family or your clan. Anyway, event updated November 30th per Front Office Sports, Santa Ynez Band of Chumza Indians, whom the family and his family are affiliated with. See, like this kid's, that's what they also didn't know at this time. This kid's grandfather is straight up a member of a tribal council. He's Native American. Anyway, have released a statement condemning the wearing regalia as part of a costume or participating in any other type of cultural appropriation. Here's the full statement. So this is, again, this guy, because, again, this is the actual picture. The guy literally selected this one, and this is what's getting passed around as if the kid just had blackface on. And I want to talk about, before I even forget, is just intent. Do you think this 9-year-old said to himself, I'm going to go to the Kansas City Chief game, of which I happen to be a fan, and then I'm going to wear blackface so that I can show how much I hate black people? That's what you think this 9-year-old kid was thinking about? But you have to remember, when it comes to the alt-left, intent doesn't matter. Just the fact that we made up a reason to be offended is all that it takes. And if you try to create a logical or rational reason as to why we are wrong in our assessment of you, then you need to stop demanding that people use logic and reason and other white forms of knowledge. I wish I was making that up, but that's a real quote from Brett Weinstein's Witch Hunt. Anyway, so apparently the tribe spoke out and says, we are aware that a young member of our community attended his Kansas City Chiefs game in a headdress and face paint in his way of supporting his favorite team. Please keep in mind that the decisions made by individuals or families in our community are their own and may not reflect the views of the broader tribal community. As a federally recognized tribe, the Santa Ynez Band of Chumsa Indians does not endorse wearing regalia as part of a costume or participating in any type of cultural appropriation. This is like them kind of trying to say that they condemned this kid, but they didn't. They even admit that the kid is part of their community. So it just comes back to, like, once. Remember what I said before, guys, like in the last stream I just did. There's no acceptable way to be white. Like you can't not use their symbols. You can't use their symbols. There's no way. And you can't even be Native American enough. This kid could be full Native, and of course they would probably say the same crap, So anyway, the grandfather and father reportedly affiliated with the Santa Ynez Band of Chumsa Indians. Now, he stuck the update, of course, up at the top, but that's new. Anyway, it takes a lot to disrespect two groups of people at once. But on Sunday afternoon in Las Vegas, a Kansas City Chiefs fan found a way to hate black people and Native Americans at the same time. This is from the original article. It was as if John Gruden's emails had come to life. The image of a Chiefs fan in blackface wearing a native headdress during a road game leads to so many unanswered questions. Why did the camera person give this fan the attention? Probably because he looked pretty fucking cool. Why did the producer allow that camera angle to be aired at all? Like, are you thinking that the producer just thought to himself, oh, look at that, there's a kid making fun of black people. Quick, turn the camera angle on him. No, that's not what they were doing, dude. This is part of the problem with critical race theory, is because this race consciousness thing, as I went over in my episode recently about racism in the gym, this guy is just walking around his gym looking for racism everywhere. This is what it leads to, is these kinds of bizarre conspiracy theories in this way that, there's a racist conspiracy theory going on here. Anyway, despite their age, who taught that person that what they were wearing was appropriate? Well, probably his Native American mother and his Native American grandfather. But, anyway, the answers to all of those questions lead back to the NFL. While it isn't the league's responsibility to stop racism and hate from being taught in the home, they are a league that has relentlessly participated in prejudice. If the NFL had outlawed the chop at Chiefs games and had been more aggressive in changing the team's name, then we wouldn't be here. There's no place for a franchise to be called the Chiefs in a league that's already eradicated Redskins. There's no pretty way to mascot people, Amanda Blackhorse, a Native American activist and an organizer of pregame protest rally, told USA Today Sports earlier this year. This is what happens when you ban books that stand against critical race theory and try to erase centuries of hate. That's not what goes on in critical race theory. Critical race theory tells you to go into absolutely every situation with race consciousness. I've done multiple videos on this topic of how it ends up transforming the psychology of the people who get involved in it, because it amplifies any any possibility of racism around you. And just like the witch hunts and inquisitions of old, if you're stuck in this critical race theory mentality, if you don't find racism in a given place, you just haven't looked hard enough yet. It's just like the professional witch hunters of old. If you haven't found the witch in the village, you just haven't looked hard enough yet. Satan's under every rock, and so is the evil white racist, as actual Justice Warrior would call them. Anyway, you give future generations the ammunitions they need to evolve and recreate racism better than before. So again, we're going to recreate racism better than before by doing what? By using the imagery of powerful Native American warriors and admiring them. Remember what I said earlier when I started this stream? People chose their family coats of arms and the imagery that are in them to honor or to try, to draw energy essentially from the magnificence of those symbols, or how they in some way personified themselves, some kind of aspect that they're trying to bring about. When somebody wants to name their team the Warriors, the Braves, the whatever, it's because they're acknowledging the heroism and courage and strength of the Native Americans. That was what their intent was all along. And it's no different than it is when somebody wants to be the Vikings, or, the Boston Celtics symbol is a fighting Irishman. I guess that's it's actually Notre Dame, but you get the idea. They're personifying a certain strong element. That was their plan. It's meant to be essentially a compliment. So when somebody picks a Native American war chief as the symbol for their tribe, it's the same motivation that a clan might have done when they were picking a lion or a dragon on their heraldry. But anyway, I digress. So we are committed, quote, to inspire change in the social justice work that inspires change for the long term. Anna Isaacson, an NFL senior vice president of social responsibility, told the Associated Press back in 2021. This was the time when the league was beginning to allow players to wear decals on their helmets that read "Stop Hate, Black Lives Matter, Inspire Change, and Say Their Stories" as part of the NFL's social justice initiatives. Notice how it's usually referred to as social justice and not racial justice, as a way to soften the hate. What? So now even using the term social justice instead of racial justice is wrong? This is why I said that the current left's ideology is just designed to create internal madness. Because now people who are fighting for social justice are trying to soften hate. They should call it racial justice. But don't forget that what I've said from the beginning, as my mentor Jacques Fresco used to point out, if you try to focus too much on individual group grievance activism, this is inevitably what happens to you. Your grievances become more important than anyone else's. Nobody else's grievances are as important as yours. And we saw that when critical race theory and all of this social justice bullshit came to the Occupy Wall Street movement, because then it all needed to be about racism. We weren't talking about classism or wealth disparities anymore. We weren't talking about the super wealthy seeking to literally destroy all of the middle class and the poor. No, not giving special treatment to white kids or anything like that. White trash kids are not beloved by the wealthy, but no. It's all about racism, and it's all systemic racism. Anyway, however, the ultimate insult from the league can be seen during each game as "end racism, and it takes all of us" are sketched into the end zones. Do you know how big your balls have to be to say that racism should be ended when you have a racist past like the NFL? So what should they do? You can't put "end racism, and it takes all of us" in the end zone. You can't do that. Your pandering is still not enough. You have a racist past, apparently. This is why I keep saying, guys, there is no right way to be white to them. This is why when 4chan trying to handle it this way. Oh, there we go. Hold on a second, guys. I got something playing. There we go. There's no good way to do this. There's no good way to rescue these people. Inevitably, if you can even put it in your end zone to end racism, and that's not enough. You still haven't done enough. If you have a racist past like the NFL, what should they do? Disband the NFL? Will that be enough? Well, no, because if you're stuck in this stupid racist mentality that critical race theory encourages, I'm sure that then they would go on to say, well, if you disband the NFL, you're doing it because lots of black kids have become wealthy through the NFL. Like that's how these kind of people will think. Like it's like but even with that, Colin Kaepernick still describes him, the NFL draft as a slave auction because he's a slave apparently. Anyway, so it's as if Jim Trotter and Brian Flores aren't actively suing them for alleged racism right now. As Attorney General in New York and California are also investigating them for similar allegations. The NFL is making people of color into millionaires for playing a game. For playing a game. You are becoming a millionaire for playing a game. I'm not saying that athletes don't work. They do. But I don't think this really works. It's also cruel to expect the oppressed to assist their oppressors in the termination of their own oppression. Remember what I said, there's no redeeming factor here, guys. This is why I said that this is going to be a genocidal mentality. This is an attempt to try to develop a new master race movement, and it's just going to do it in the other direction. This is literally how Nazi ideology starts to become more, accepted, but it's coming in from another direction. There's no way to exist as white. That's why I said earlier about when 4chan, before I got interrupted, 4chan was doing a prank, literally just to go around with posters that say it's okay to be white. And that was investigated as a hate crime. All they said was it's okay to be white. They didn't say black people are bad. They didn't say that being white was superior. All they had to do was say it's okay to be white. And that triggered people because they don't actually believe it's okay to be white. That's really the point behind all this. Anyway, and if you're wondering if the NFL is delusional enough to believe that their end zone slogans are making a difference, you're correct. The league is beyond sensitive when it comes to their message. In the preseason, there was a rumor floating around that play football would be the new motto etched on the field. When Deadspin contacted the league about it, received a prompt response, 12 minutes, saying otherwise, there's been no change from previous years. Beginning with the regular season, clubs will have in end zone stencils featuring "It takes all of us and end racism." Wrote by Brian McCarthy, the league's vice president of communications, to Deadspin in an email exchange. Play football was featured for the preseason as part of a league initiative. As of now, the league hasn't released a statement on what took place in the stands in Las Vegas on Sunday. That photo of that fan floating around on the internet is beyond a bad look for the league, while simultaneously being what should be expected from the NFL. The NFL stands with the black community, the players, clubs, and fans. This is a quote. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell once said, confronting systemic racism with tangible and productive steps is absolutely essential. We will not relent in our work, and we will redouble our efforts to be a catalyst for the urgent and sustainable change that our society and communities so desperately need. I can't think of anything the NFL could do that would actually appease this guy, short of making sure that all black athletes are paid 3 times what anyone else is. Like, what else does he want? When is it enough? They're never satisfied. This is why this kind of a movement just divides and destroys anything it touches. By design, this guy will never be happy. And that's why I said it leads to genocidal thinking, because of the fact that if there is no way for that person that you hate, that you've been educated to hate, can even exist without offending you, well, then you got to eradicate them. That's where this heads. And when you watch my video from where I did a review of The Root, bringing on Brittany Cooper, a professor who literally just at one point spits out, my first instinct is to say we need to take these motherfuckers out. This is literally in a video trying to explain what critical race theory is and to try to debunk right-wing conspiracy theories about it. And she just flat out says, my first instinct is to say we need to take these motherfuckers out, referring to white people. You can find that video on my channel. And anyway, 3 years after Goodell made that comment, the league is worse off than it was when the commissioner was scrambling during America's racial awakening in 2020. He apologized for Colin Kaepernick, allowed players to kneel in peaceful protests, and promised that things would change. Nothing has. And after that, we saw on Sunday, it feels like nothing ever will. It's all racism and evil because apparently this kid, who is Native American, whose grandfather is literally part of a tribal council, is oppressing them. Just by existing there were tribes that painted themselves, all throughout history. Blackface was meant specifically to try to emulate black people. And it was done, ironically, in a situation where black people were not allowed on stage. So they could have just went up on stage and actually performed as white performers, but they chose not to do that. I remember at one point watching a movie when I was a kid about a guy literally doing this because he wanted to share jazz music with other people, but they wouldn't let black people perform it. So he went up there with blackface essentially as a point to them, that this comes from black culture. He was trying to share this beautiful music that he had heard with people from other places, but these people were not allowed to go up and do it themselves. That's actually what that all started from. And there are other people who've done it to make fun of and mock people in the past. But this kid is not trying to depict a black person at all. And when somebody brought up, well, you left out the fact that, he has red on the other side, he's like, I could argue that makes it worse. Like, again, they're never satisfied. There is no way to make this right. And as 16th points out here, Irish Lives Matter too is deemed hate in Ireland. It doesn't surprise me at all. And we're going to talk about some aspects of Ireland here in a little bit. But the fact that there are people there that are saying we would really rather migrants didn't stab and kill our girls, and that they are pissed about it because, yeah, the Irish aren't going to fucking take that shit. And that somehow that's racism or hate is just stupid. It's just stupid. It just... Anyway, I'm going to go back over here over in the chat, kind of look at some of the points you guys made while I was reading that because I was focused on it. I see Tennessee Tricycles, PDX is in here, 16th is in here. My future wife, Daisy Girl, is here. M. Kathy is here. And who else is here? Lucifer the Doberman, Morbidly a Beast. Depends on which color he put on first. One Drop Rule. The writer of that Bologna seems to be the racist one in all of this ridiculous, says Oifel. I would agree, but he's been conditioned to believe he can't be racist. That's another thing I'm dealing with right now in one of my arguments on Facebook in this issue about whether or not black people can be racist. Literally, the only effect of telling black people that they can't be racist is now that they literally look at everything as a racist because they've been told that no matter how racist they are, they somehow can't be. The Golden State should change from the Warriors to the Social Justice Warriors. Yeah, I know what you're saying there. The problem is would you ever want to be a social justice warrior? Your mascot would be like a pink-haired, trans dude or something, with a screaming face with or you'd have to grab maybe you'd grab a picture of that woman who screamed no at the top of her lungs when Trump got elected. That would be your mascot, right? And who else we got here? Okay, and Mary Jane. Hey, Mary Jane. She says, funny, most people have no idea what we Indians look like. Can we be racist since we are only 0.7% of the population? That's usually how they put it. They try to say that. My problem with this whole racism requires power thing is that they are, like I said, the only thing that ends up happening is that they exclude themselves from being able to engage in racism. And they act like, and so okay, we could discuss that perhaps racists who have power are more dangerous than people who don't, right? We can discuss systemic racism. We can discuss systems of oppression without trying to imply that unless you're in the power group that you are racist. Like, you're not racist, basically, is what they're trying to say. That apparently even guys calling for genocide of white people can't possibly be racist. And that's why I said during one of my videos specifically on this issue was, I brought up the clip that I have on my BitChute of a black professor on C-SPAN calling for the extermination of white people. And I'm like, when does he become a racist? Is he not a racist until he's putting people on the trains to be gassed? Is there some transitional moment when we get to go, oh, we got to stop him now, he's racist? And at the same time, these are the people who have an ideology, especially through Antifa, that they reserve the right to attack anyone physically whom even says things they don't agree with, and that supposedly they are doing this to prevent the rise of fascism. But apparently it's okay to allow the rise of racism, if they have some switch at some point where somehow that person becomes racist. I don't understand how they think they're going to deal with it. The other argument that I generally make with them is, if what they were saying was true, the Nazis did not become racist until Hitler won an election. Leading up to that, the Nazi Party had very little power. At one point, they brought in like 0.4% of the vote in Germany, and they had a failed coup. Mein Kampf was actually written from a prison cell. Like, they had no power. So if you were going to go along with this argument, then apparently the Nazis were not racist until they took power. And of course, if you pose that question to a leftist, they never want to give you a good faith answer, because then they would have to face that. They would have to face the fact that what they're trying to suggest is that somehow Hitler wasn't racist until he had power. But they don't want it to be that way. What they really want it to be is that only white people can be racist, because this has all been about trying to demonize anybody who happens to be Caucasian the entire time. That's really the objective here. There is no right way to be white, according to them. That's how like I said, that's how a genocidal ideology takes hold. And as he points out, well, what is power? A thug with a gun has power. That's another reason why it doesn't make any sense. So is there a point at which then like, what if they gain power for 30 seconds because they have a firearm? What if they have power because there's 8 of them and they're beating up on a white kid? We've been told those people aren't racist either. But anyway, let's get back to the main point here. So going into this, when it comes to trying to analyze how different cultures feel about them being depicted, in this way, there are actually Native American activists, like I mentioned earlier. Like, there was one who was a Huron chief who literally said it was okay to call your team the Huron, that's an honor to us, and there was a movement specifically to try to fight back against removing the Redskins name. And they were ironically somehow called fake Native Americans, which is just like, because we're supposed to listen to people of color until they don't agree with you. Then they're not people of color anymore. Ross Wolf says, only institutional power counts, so I've been told. So a mugger with a gun is still powerless somehow. Right. And if you fight them back, then you're racist. That's generally how they operate. But anyway, Ofuck says to check out the term apophenia. It's the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. This sounds like something that they try to do when they're trying to accuse anybody who's a conspiracy theorist, of being crazy. But I know what you mean. That's how you just end up in life with a confirmation bias, looking for some evidence of racism or sexism or bigotry under every rock. That's how it operates, and it's not a healthy place to be in your life. All right, so moving on. There have been people who are trying to push back on all of this nonsense, and so we're going to see some clips, to that end, that are actually from, GASP, Real Native Americans, right? And hear what they have to say on this topic. And we're also going to look at some of the different, ways that this has gone down. Because another thing, just like many other aspects of the left, is that there's a lot of contradiction here. What is okay for one group is not okay for another group, and usually for completely different group reasons. There's no consistency. So let's start first of all, with this ESPN article I found, specifically addressing this issue, and says tribe supports Native American mascots. Last week, I wrote about a recent symposium about Native American imagery in sports. It took place in the National Museum of American Indian in Washington. Everyone quoted in the article was opposed to such imagery, which led to many readers ask why I didn't give equal time to the other side. The answer is that simple. I was there to cover the symposium, and every single speaker at the event, about 3 times as many people as I ended up quoting in my column, was opposed to the use of Native American mascots, logos, and team names. The Washington Redskins were invited to have a representative at the event, but they declined. But it's true that there are some Native Americans who are fine with the use of Native American imagery in sports. In central Michigan, for example, the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe recently announced that it had no problem with a local high school whose name was called the Warriors. I was curious to learn more, so I contacted the Saginaw Chippewas and spoke with their public relations director, Frank Cloutier. Here's how the conversation went. UniWatch. First, for people who aren't familiar with the Saginaw Chippewas, please tell me a bit about your tribe. Frank goes on to explain our tribe was formed with the ratification of our Constitution in 1936. We have 3,292 members, and we live in the territories called the Isabella Federal Indian Reserve in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, just north of Lansing. We have a fifth or sixth largest Indian-owned casino in the Midwest, so we're rather successful when it comes to our economic growth and development. But it's not just about gaming for us, it's about our culture. We have a very rich, diverse culture, which is showcased in a world-class, award-winning cultural museum on our reservation. So the situation regarding mascots and team names piques our interest. So the columnist asks, many of the people taking part in this debate see it as a black and white issue. Either they're completely opposed to all uses of Native American imagery, or they have no problem with any of it. What's your position of your tribe's position on that? And then he goes, it's very, very clear for us because we've worked with so many institutions in our area. Our position is that if it's not derogatory and it's being used appropriately with an opportunity to cross share our culture, then it's fine. There's nothing derogatory about warriors or braves. There's nothing derogatory about Indian. But terms like redskin or half-breed, those are derogatory terms to us. So the columnist asks again, so when the Michigan Department of Civil Rights recently filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education claiming Native American mascots and nicknames are inherently harmful to Native children, you don't agree with that? And he goes, in the study they used, they said these Native children who go to these schools with these mascots are marginalized. But if you look at generational trauma and the way Native peoples were treated 300 years ago, it wasn't until 1924 that we were formally recognized as human beings, and we didn't get the chance to vote until after women did. That's what makes these kids feel marginalized, the way their culture and their people were treated. I don't believe that a menacing-looking brave on the backboard of a basketball hoop is going to marginalize that child as much as that generational trauma. That said, however, I believe that these schools using the images have an obligation to talk about the truth of Native American history. One of the largest genocides in the world history happened right here on American soil, and it happened to Native Americans. So it's important to talk about the true history about the settling of the United States, and to talk about those things that happened to Native Americans that are often not talked about. If Native American children are struggling, hopefully this kind of education and outreach help identify why instead of having us blame it on a mascot. This is really an interesting point here. Because they're willing to take some kind of stupid stand. I accidentally clicked on something I didn't want to. They're trying to take some big, virtue signal stand. They're willing to fight the use of a mascot, but they don't do anything about, for example, life on the reservations, which sucks. That's, don't spend any time on anything that's actually important or might actually require that you do something, beneficial. It's so much easier just to get on the internet and virtue signal and pretend like you did something good for people, But anyway, so the columnist says, so when you say it's fine to use non-derogatory images as long as it's being used appropriately, you're saying that part of that appropriate use is educational content about Native Americans? And he says, yes. For example, in 2003, we entered into an articulation agreement with the Central Michigan University because they are the Chippewas. As part of that agreement, the tribe and the university each has an obligation. Each year, I go in and address every freshman athletic student about our culture and what it means to be a Chippewa, and about the proud, competitive nature of our people. Remember what I said earlier about we pick mascots because they personify some, aspect that we would like to bring into ourselves, that it's actually a compliment or an admiration? Imagine that. Anyway, we explain that it's not about war paint and fake feathers. It's about honoring the triumph of these resilient, competitive people. There are also areas on campus that are dedicated to presence of the Chippewa Nation. So it's a good cross-cultural exchange. And then we go out there and compete. They're Chippewas. They're fighting like Chippewa, fighting to win. We've made that university our school of choice for Native Americans because our tribal community is close by, so we can help support those Native students. So again, they're honoring the culture. That's the motive here. That's what they're trying to accomplish. This is not derogatory. This is an honor. Anyway, columnist asked, what if a high school or university wasn't interested in doing these types of cultural exchanges and educational efforts? What would your feelings be about their use of Native imagery? Says it would be completely different. If they're not willing to celebrate and show the culture, they shouldn't have the privilege of depicting it. Then he says, what about states that have already banned all Native imagery from their high schools like Wisconsin and Oregon? And he points out, well, I think that's a missed opportunity for the type of cultural exchange and education that I just described. You could be taking an opportunity to actually share your culture, and its cultural values with other people. That was actually, ironically, what Bruce Lee was trying to accomplish with his films. When he wanted to do the Kung Fu TV show, it was because he wanted an opportunity to share Chinese culture with people of the United States so that they would understand them better and actually even come to value them. And that's actually what that show did in a lot of ways. But anyway, you know, he does say here, that he is, basically fine with them getting rid of the Redskins, but he did say here, how do you feel about the NCAA's regulations restricting the use of Native American imagery, but allowing it when permission is granted by a local tribe, as in the case of Florida State University and the Seminoles? He says, I think that's absolutely fine. That's basically what we do with CMU. So many teams say that their use of Native American imagery is meant to be an honor, especially when they use names like the Warriors, which is meant to symbolize American Indians' fighting spirit. But there are others who say this plays into the stereotype of Indians as savages who aren't good at anything except making war. How do you feel about that? You see, this is an example of what I mean when somebody just needs to assign a negative meaning to absolutely anything. And we're going to get into that in a moment when I talk about the fighting Irish mascot, because there are a lot of cultural stereotypes about Irish people being fighters and being people who get into brawls. But I don't choose to interpret it that way. I choose to interpret it as that means that we're brave and strong and capable of fighting. That it doesn't mean that's all they're good at. Like that's anyway, so when you choose to say a wolf or a dragon, as your mascot, are you implying that all the wolf does is kill things all day and that's all it's good at? Anyway, once again, it goes back to the responsibility of the school. If they're using a menacing looking Indian and trying to intimidate the other team because they might get scalped, that's inappropriate. But if they're using an image that evokes spirit and competition and they've celebrated the culture, then they've done their job and they've earned the right to proudly display that logo. So anyway, I've kind of like gotten what I wanted out of this article, but one of the things he does say here is important. He's like, one of the most contentious issues that comes up in these discussions is whether white people's opinions or any non-native opinions should even matter. Should non-natives have a voice in this debate? Should we simply have a vote among Native Americans and let them decide? This is one of the biggest problems with what happened with the progressive stack at Occupy, because they would try to decide at certain points whether or not white people were even allowed to talk about any given topic. If somebody has a valid point, it literally does not fucking matter how much melanin is in their skin. If somebody has a stupid point, it does not matter how much melanin is in their skin. But this is how they wanted it to go. They wanted to be able to exclude people of certain colors. But again, this is something they are not in any way consistent about, as we're going to see in a little bit when I show you some videos from some Native American activists who don't agree with some of the nonsense going on. But, you should have the race card if it's appropriate or in some way, contentious for them, like, advantageous for their position. And then the race card gets revoked in a second. That's why I always say it's listen to black people, unless they're Candace Owens, unless they're Thomas Sowell, then you don't listen to black people anymore. Not those black people, right? Anyway, so the native guy says, I have to chuckle when I hear that. We all live in this wonderful globe together. If there's a negative impact on any one group, that impacts all of us as a whole. I think everyone collectively can have a voice in this. We have many brothers and sisters in various minority groups who know what it means to be marginalized. So, of course, we welcome their voices. And he says, would that also apply to white Americans? He goes, absolutely. If we're going to have this debate and bring it up in a positive conclusion, we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by limiting it. So, yeah, you should actually talk to white people if you want to convince them of something and then expect that they will probably have something to say in return. But that isn't how most of these activists want this to go. They want white people to be shamed into total cuck silence and not in any way ever say anything at all and just let them, or just like I said earlier, cease to exist. That seems to be the case, and he also goes on to say, every tribe is, welcome to, to their own opinions. So let's have a look at some videos that were done, by other people on this topic after I get a chance to kind of go through the chat here, see what you guys have been saying. Mary Jane says, the activist engines call me an apple. I'm red on the outside and white on the inside. And I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at them. Wow. That's what it is. You're white on the inside. Remember what I said earlier about how like they wanted to just be able to make this special way to be able to revoke your race card anytime they want, because you don't agree with them, you're therefore no longer them. And Ross Wolf says this native guy is super sensible. More journalists should talk to him. I would agree. I think he was very fair. You know, what is it? Strategic Eyes in here? Let me see. Strategic is back in my chat again. Strategic is back again. Yay. What's up, Strategic? So, anyway, moving right along. Thank you for tuning into V Radio. If this is the first time checking me out, do be sure to check out my archives. You'll find lots of other great videos on topics like these and stuff. All right, moving on. So let's take a look at some of these videos, specifically where they talk to natives about cultural appropriation. Of course, this one's from PragerU, right? But that doesn't disqualify it for me. PragerU didn't go pay these Native Americans to say these things.
What's up, guys? This is Will Witt with Prager.
Oh, before we continue, if you have not subscribed to the Strategic Eyes show yet, you absolutely need to. He's honestly probably one of my favorite YouTubers, period. So you guys will absolutely love Strategic Eyes' stuff. He is a great orator. He's talks just fantastic, inspiring stuff. He's a police officer who happens to be Black. He has a great perspective on policing, and also the Black community, and you're going to get great content from Strategic Eyes. I advise him all the time, meaning advise that people check him out. I can't say that I've given him advice perhaps at one time or another, but that's not what I meant. All right, so let's get back to this video, or as Strategic would say, all right, let's keep going.
PragerU. Today we're at the Navajo Nation and we're talking to people today about political correctness, issues facing their community and their culture. Let's do it. Do you find the name Washington Redskins, is that offensive to you?
I don't think so. In my personal opinion, no. I am a Washington Redskins fan.
I don't think it's terrible, because the Redskins actually came down last year with our Native American people and taught them how to do football, the little kids,
I don't find it offensive. If someone came to me and called me a Redskin to my face, hey, it's my fault for letting that hurt me. I believe as Navajos and as Native Americans, we have larger issues to deal with than name calling.
Yeah. I like the Cleveland Indians. I thought that was pretty cool, but some people would say that was like a drunken native on a logo.
Now I got to pause it for a second and point this out, because what he just said there is fucking gold. We have larger issues to deal with. we have much more important things to deal with, right? Getting rid of the Redskins logo on the side of an NFL football helmet is not going to put food in the mouths of the poor kids who live on these fucking reservations. The forgotten ghettos of Native American reservations. These people, you're not helping anyone by getting a logo canceled. This is so not important in comparison to the actual needs of these crime-ridden, poverty-stricken reservations. Seriously, they have much bigger problems. Anyway, let's keep going.
You know what I mean? But the Redskins, I mean, that's a fighter, you know what I mean? And you look at the Apache helicopters, you look at the Navajo code talkers, you see people jumping on airplanes saying Geronimo. So that's just admiration that the American cultures that's adapting and bringing into their environment.
We can't dwell on the past. Progress is in the future, and so we have to look forward as Native people.
I didn't know if you heard about Elizabeth Warren talking about 1024th Native American, putting that out there. What does that mean to you when she says that?
I think that's just a way of kind of having an advantage, being in a political position. Yeah. Let me ask a question back. If I were, maybe in a different country, let's say Ireland, and maybe I had 1% and I was trying to claim the 1%, you know what I mean? Kind of like that, you know what I mean?
What would you say are the biggest issues right now facing the Navajo community?
Definitely language and culture preservation.
And realizing that it is something we need to preserve, and it's something very special and unique, something that a lot of people don't get to enjoy. It's a cool thing being Navajo and being Native American in this day and age.
Yeah. If someone were to dress up as a Native American for Halloween, what do you think about that? Someone outside of the community?
There's a fine line there. For me, there are totems. There are pieces of attire and regalia that are authentic and only meant to be worn during certain times or certain acts of ceremony. But you know, if you go to Walgreens or Walmart or the Halloween store or, you know, a costume specialty store, you buy something that's obviously fake, I don't really have a problem with that.
You know, the symbolism of the headdress and stuff like that. And I can see how Native Americans traditionally, who may not see that as great, but as a young person like myself, I think that's a cool thing that we get to be represented.
But when you start mutilating eagles or sacred animals to make up your regalia just for a Halloween costume, then you're crossing a line.
Disrespecting the culture.
Exactly. But as far as cultural appropriation, mankind wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for cultural appropriation. At some point in our history, somebody took the idea of making fire from another culture.
And the Navajos were able to adapt and basically learn from the people that they were and able to integrate that into their own culture. So we were basically survivors. We take a lot of pride in that. And then the Navajo code talkers that were in the South Pacific Theater that used their Native American.
I want to comment a little bit on what he just said about cultural appropriation. He's absolutely right. Every culture does that in some way or another. It just became a sin recently. And it's amazing the depths that people will head off to in order to try to justify this. There's an article you can find, for example, if you Google it, of a guy says that white people shouldn't be allowed to own dogs because other cultures are the ones that, you know, figured out how to domesticate dogs. So we're stealing from them by owning dogs. This is, I can't. You know, I grew up in a culturally diverse area and a racially diverse area. My kids were raised in one. So this notion that we have to sit around analyzing which group of humans may have devised one thing or another is just absurd. But again, it's one of those things that just does not go both ways. You know, you're not going to see, you know, people of color who happen to be these crazy activists refusing to use any technology or eat any food that might have been devised by a European culture, because this always goes only one way. They have no place in their heads in any way for white people to exist, period. That is how that's the direction this is headed, guys. There is no white culture to them. You know, and then their version of it would be to suggest things like that apparently, you know, white people were imperialists before anyone else, and people of color were safely, you know, like traveling the oceans peacefully and trading with other cultures before white people showed up and introduced imperialism. I wish I was making that up. Again, that's Brittany Cooper, the professor who was on The Root, which is a Black Issues network, explaining what critical race theory is, saying that critical race theory is an accurate depiction of history, and then stating that fact, which is not a fact at all, right? Native, you know, and the African tribes were quite capable of making war on and enslaving one another, just like everybody else. Not more, not less, the same, because all cultures engage in this kind of shit. Anyway, let's keep going.
Language, and they were instrumental in every marine action and all the different scattered network islands overseas. And I mean, it could have been any other, you know, people in the world, but by the blessing of the Creator, we were, you know, given and granted that opportunity to protect our homeland, which is America, you know.
But I think it has become very unfortunate that we live in a culture and a society where outrage has become a recreational pastime, where people nit and pick until they find something wrong, and then they become outraged by it. And that, for me, I believe that hurts cross-cultural relationships. I believe it hinders us helping to understand each other. Now here at the museum, I give a lot of cultural lectures and a lot of cultural tours. That's part of my job here. And I always start off every tour and every questionnaire session with, I'm very difficult to offend. And I believe that the most offensive questions are the questions that need to be asked and answered. Because that's the only way we learn, with each other. Whether it's between religion, beliefs, cultures, gender, it doesn't matter. The most offensive things are sometimes the most important conversations to have.
All right, guys, so we just finished up here at the Keshmish Festival.
So what that guy just said there about how there's an outrage culture is 1,000% spot on. 1,000%. There are people who have nothing better to do with their time than to look around to find something to be irritated about. Again, so those people are going to organize protests, get people together to go to colleges to try to get the mascots taken off of helmets. Why don't they open up any food court, courts or anything in Native American reservations and actually help these people? Why don't they do that? Like, I get lectured constantly all the time, usually by people who don't realize that I'm a Native American Caucasian guy who grew up in a black neighborhood. You know, people who've never done a damn thing for the black community in their entire lives will lecture me on my privilege and my position, even though I've been poor white trash my whole fucking life. And that I drive literally an hour out of my way to coach wrestling at an almost, yeah, in fact, let me think about it. Yeah, the whole team is black. All of the kids I coach are black. All of them. And we got one of them a free ride to college last year. That's real life-changing activism. None of this shit about logos and sports nonsense is in any way going to help anyone's life. Strategic is trolling us. My African ancestors were flying to the moon before you goddamn white folks came and disturbed our peace. Screw Western culture and screw capitalism too. Also screw this $1,500 phone I'm typing on. Right, exactly. And that's, and the craziest thing about the black supremacy movement is that you always have to ask them, if you guys are so superior, why did this go down the way that you're saying it? Because you want to try to simultaneously say that somehow white people are inferior, but also succeeded as she even said it, coming out of their caves looking raggedy. That was what the woman said in that video, right? That white people are somehow the inferior race that conquered the vastly technological superior black people. That is their story. It's a crazy Nazi master race in blackface. That's really what these people think. And it's just so internally inconsistent. That's why I said the alt-left is an ideology designed to create madness in those who take it on, because it's full of contradictions that cannot possibly exist in the same mind. In a sane mind, in the same mind. See what I did there? Sane and sane. Yep. Anyway. So now we're going to move on to my next video specifically about this topic. And these are going to be more clips of Native Americans discussing this issue specifically about mascots. So this was put together by the Native American Guardians Association. They're NAGA. I was like, oh wait, it's NAGA. It's like the Native American MAGA, right? And I'm sure that's exactly what they're going to be called, right? But these guys go and talk to natives about this topic.
They were honored that the Institute of Higher Learning would honor them by using their name. That's why we're here today in support of the people here that are trying to keep the name. And for any other universities or schools that are threatened by NCAA or other agencies, state agencies that want to do away with native imagery, I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong. To me, it's the end result is what's trying to be accomplished here is just going to erase native people from the history throughout the United States. It's sad the way it's happening. It's showing our support. That as far away as North Dakota, this small group down here that's fighting to keep the emblem here at the University of Illinois. That these are Indian people are coming down in support of what they are doing. I think it's going to make an impact on this university community, just simply by showing our support and what we believe in.
You most likely believe that if the Fighting Illini name and the honored use of that name and what it is part of, if that were to be lost, it would be very detrimental to Native Americans all across the country.
I think so. I think so. The underlying intention of that, I think, is just to, like I said earlier, erase us from the history of this nation. Today, I feel good about myself because I've learned a lot of my heritage as a Sioux person, and I'm proud of it. And like I said earlier, I'm proud that a university would use our name. I was hurt by some of our people who looked at racism or prejudice and then blame it on an image. You know, that's something that I take pride in. I learned to speak through prayer. So a daily prayer, asking the Creator to look down upon us and pity us, the humans and the animals and the plant life. You know, we're all one. So what we always say is mitakuya oviasi, which means I'm related to everything, and that's in my daily prayer. You know, that I end it that way. I feel at peace when I can do that. You know?
So, as you can see, he's just pointing out to it being an honor. Like, wait, you mean that there's a university, a place of higher learning that wants to use our imagery? It's like, that's what it is, folks. Apparently, these racist white owned colleges hate Native Americans and think they're so inferior that they literally want their students to take on their symbolism as their moniker. That's the part that makes no sense. It's like, it makes no sense. If you hated Native Americans, you wouldn't want their symbolism on anything, and you sure as hell would not want to try to in any way look like them, you know, or act like them, or in any way be represented by them or as them. You know, it's just like the having black friends thing. You know, racists don't have black friends. They don't. Real racists do not have black friends. You know, so you need to tell them, you know, the first thing that the racial activists need to do is to be sure that any white guy who happens to have a black friend cannot possibly bring up that he has black friends. No real racist has black friends. But that's why they needed to be gone, right? You know, so anyway, going back to this, because I'm going to be doing a video about that at another time. That's just something we need to take a stand against because I'm tired of it. No, I probably have not only black friends, but more black people in my life than any of these fucking rich upper middle class to wealthy white kids who are sermonizing to me about my racial experiences. That's what's crazy about it. So anyway, you know, moving on to more takes from some Native Americans on this topic, and somebody did make a valid point that they were curious how many people might have been offended, you know, that PragerU had talked to, and I'm sure that there probably were. It's just that those people are already being given a voice. The Native Americans who don't agree with this nonsense are not being given a voice. And then, like, you know, I guess they're called apples, like Mary Jane said, red on the outside and white on the inside. I can't believe that shit. Wow. Anyway, all right. So moving right along, we're gonna go on to the next clip that I had pulled up by this, or not by this, but for this. It was, oh, did I grab it? Because there was actually, let me see. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this one was really good.
So why eradicate out my history? Why? I mean, I don't have no problem with redskin. When we went to war, we painted our faces red, our arms red, and our legs. How do you think the Blackfeet Indians got their name from the white man? Because they painted their feet, from their feet all the way up their knee, black. So they call them Blackfeet. I mean, is that prejudice? Huh? Is that racist? So how can redskin be racist? How can it be? And we're not the only tribe that painted our faces and bodies red for war. It stood for valor, you know? So this eradication, man, I'm gonna tell you,
It's the start of eliminating us again.
of course it is. That's what they're doing. They're trying to eradicate us out. Like I said earlier, 100 years from now, you won't see nothing about Native history. If we don't stop it, if we don't stand fast, that's why I'm so glad that Naga is doing what they're doing. And other Native people on the Red Road are doing the same thing, okay? That's why I'm glad we're bringing these school names back, because it's important for indigenous people. It's important for our self-esteem, and it's important for our history.
You know, reading that, I actually, or rather watching that, I was thinking about the Haka dance, the Polynesian dance, and how those people are totally fine with people learning how to do that dance to honor their culture and heritage. Like, in fact, like the people of those nations, like where those people live, like they do hakas together, right? And they're actually really interesting. They're a little funny at first because they stick their tongues out and stuff, but once you start to realize what those people are doing, you know, it's a beautiful thing. You know, in fact, you know what? Let me find that real quick. We'll pause on this because I want to watch this one video in particular that I just thought was a gorgeous example of how cultures can merge with each other. And, you know, nobody involved in this moment would have ever thought to themselves in the slightest that this was in any way denigrating or stealing. In fact, it was a multiracial wedding. And in the multiracial wedding, they therefore the grooms and the brides, you know, like relatives were all mutually involved in this wedding ceremony, and they do this haka dance. If you've never watched one of these, this is fantastic, right? So how is it that these two cultures can figure it out, you know, but nobody else can, right? Like I remember this video. I go back and watch this sometimes just because I want to. So let's check this out. If you haven't seen this, this is really emotional and powerful. But these are two cultures coming together to honor the marriage of two of their members. See, like the brotherhood and like just the beautiful merger of those two cultures, right? Because if somebody else were to see that in the United States, they would have taken this beautiful moment where it's very clear that those people put a lot of time into learning how to do that right. They would have taken that moment and turned it into some kind of evil appropriation. You see, all the white New Zealanders in that were actually oppressing, the Maori and the Polynesians that were in there. Obviously, they were stealing from them, right? And that's just a big bag of horse shit. It's just not true. That was, like, in my opinion, a gorgeous merger, and it was to honor this multiracial culture, to fuse them together, and you could see the brotherhood, between the people of the different cultures as they're embracing each other, putting their faces together, right? Like, to me, that is what we used to try to do. I was interested in cultures because I wanted to learn about them because new cultures are interesting and cool, right? That was how you humanize everybody. That's how we become one tribe. That's really what the establishment does not want. They don't want moments like that. No, no, no. That reminds me actually of like when Black Lives Matter put out an official post that they condemned this one BLM chapter deciding to have a barbecue with the local police. Right? They needed to shit on that because that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. Black Lives Matter is not about trying to, mend fences and bring people together. It's once again always this obsession about separating us. Do those people in that video look like they were separate in any way? No. They are one family. Those people are one tribe. I guarantee you those people would fight to protect anyone in that tribe, no matter what skin color they had. Seriously. And yeah, pure passion. I agree, Daisy. Those are like, so they do those now? Like that, those two cultures have merged a lot in that country. Like I've seen hakas for different reasons. Like they do them at funerals. They do them like to honor teachers. Like there was a school principal that was beloved by his school that passed away. So you get to see the entire school do a haka dance. Like literally, it was just this most powerful, amazing thing. You know, and as the natives are pointing out in these videos I'm showing you guys, there's a concern about their cultures just disappearing. There's this one guy actually who made a video recently. He's a Native American shaman, and he debunked this nonsense about two-spirit, that's just like bullshit that somebody made up, that male and female are very distinct, and that they didn't get that nonsense from us. And you guys can find my video on that on Twitter, but the main point is that, this whole notion in the end was supposed to be about us being able to become one tribe, one species. But critical race theory is very against that. Critical race theory is very against any kind of like just they actually called assimilation bloodless genocide. So for the attempt to allow Black people to assimilate into our culture is actually us trying to hurt them in some way, right? So let's go ahead and move on to the next video that I had set up for this. I'm kind of glad I watched that, but man, yeah, it gives me chills too. Like just in, pure passion and, like that's why people do it. Like they'll do it before football games and stuff like that, because it is a way to honor your opponent while at the same time saying we're still here to kick your ass. So, anyway, moving right along, we've watched most of the Native American stuff that I wanted to watch, and I would move on now to why this cultural appropriation thing is so goofy, because they have these strange ways of it. Again, the rules don't apply equally to everyone. So what I mean by that is, if you ask them, why one thing should not be allowed, but the other should, they always have weird ways to get out of it, right? So, for example, remember what they said earlier, that the reason that they don't like these Native American symbolisms is because it creates, like it perpetuates some kind of racist stereotype that Native Americans are warriors. What does this Irish guy look like he's getting ready to do? Right? What is this? What kind of racial stereotypes are being depicted here? That, you could make the same argument very easily, but that isn't what happens here, right? On this article, it says Fighting Irish Notre Dame symbol is not racist like American Indian ones. So they have a way to say that this is not racist, right? Somehow this is not racist. What kind of like arguments do they give? Um, There is a simple reason why the Fighting Irish is acceptable while the Redskins, Blackhawks, and Indians are not. It is the issue of agency and who is representing whom. The later three are franchises owned by white men who profit off of predominantly white fan bases with a brand depicting whimsical, caricatured American Indians, promoting colonialism and racism at once while giving American Indians no real voice in the matter. The Fighting Irish was a nickname consciously adopted by a predominantly Irish American institution, symbolically celebrating the school's triumph and defying the prejudices hoisted upon Irish Americans in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then they go on to just say, well, but Irish people are not in any way marginalized anymore, so that's why it's not racist to them. But this is why I said that these arguments don't make any sense. If the concern is about some kind of negative depiction, well, people do. I take pride in the idea that my Irish heritage is supposed to mean I'm a brawler, but this could very easily be looked upon in a negative way. If you've ever heard the term Mick, which is literally the racist slur for Irish people, it's supposed to depict a person who is typically drunk all the time and beats their wives. That is the racist stereotypes of Irish people, and that we're criminals. Okay. And nobody wants to talk about that because one of the things that has happened here is, like, if you remember the video I just did where I did a stream where we read from the Vox article about 100 ways that white people can make life, easier or less frustrating for black people and less terrifying. One of them was to say, remember that black people are not a monolith, but they want white people to be a monolith, which is ironically actually also what the KKK tried to do. They wanted, them to be a monolith. So my main point here is that this kind of stuff is never going to be ever, fairly distributed, so to speak. They're never going to say, that it's bad to do this to anything that is Caucasian. That's always acceptable. It's always acceptable to tear down white people. It is never acceptable, to tear down people of color, at least in their point of view. And there's always a way to figure out how it's torn them down. I don't think anybody wearing a Redskin helmet goes out to think I'm going to go behave like a mindless savage and get my ass kicked. Like, that's not what they're thinking going into it. Like I said at the beginning of the video, heraldry and picking your symbolism was supposed to be about trying to find a strong way to represent yourself. Anyway. So the other thing about cultural appropriation is, as I said before, they always have some way to get out of saying it's cultural appropriation if they are doing it. So is it cultural appropriation when a black woman does Irish dance? And of course, they have a way of saying that it's not. Morgan's bullocks fleet or a blur as she swings, hops, points, and jigs in the ways that make Irish dance look natural, even, easy even. The 20-year-old from Richmond is so good that a former Irish prime minister asked her to perform in one of the country's next St. Patrick's Day parades. Riverdance invited her to join them when they tour in Virginia. With all this love came a river of hate because she's black. If white people can't have cornrows, you can't do this kind of dance, one commentator said. Commenter said on TikTok just last week, where her dance videos went viral. It's cultural appropriation, too many people told her. Well, yeah, because that's what those people have been told. They've been told that doing this is cultural appropriation. That's why when a black person is doing it, they would be like, well, that's cultural appropriation, right? Anyway, continuing. This particular battle of America's culture can be confusing and explosive one, from Zac Efron wearing dreadlocks to Selena Gomez and the Hindu bindi on her forehead. Both were panned for their looks. Cultural mashups can translate into train wrecks when done poorly. But when is it wrong? America isn't a melting pot where individual flavors can get lost, but more like a salad bowl with various cultures mixing and enhancing one another while holding on to their unique identities, appreciating, not appropriating. Well, let's look what happened last week when 4 white guys opened a wine bar in D.C. called, Barcada, which the dictionary describes as the Filipino word for the close-knit group of friends. Brilliant, right? It even has the word bar in it. Oops, the wine bar doesn't deserve any Filipino fare. nor do the entrepreneurs have any Filipino friends or partners involved in the venture, unlike the Barkada in Hollywood, which serves Filipino tapas. If the DC group had any connection to Filipino culture, they'd have learned that the deep origins of that word. It came from the Spanish word for boatload, so apparently it wasn't a Filipino word either. Anyway, yes, the original barcadas were boatloads of Filipino prisoners shipped away from their homes by boat, explained the National Federation of Filipino American Associations Capital Region, in a letter published by the Washington City paper explaining the group's objection to the wine bar's name. So no, it's not just a bunch of drinking buddies. So anyway, the wine bar apologized, and of course they needed to change it. But Bullock said that the problem for Barcada, no, we're not getting into Barcada anymore. I'm not calling it Morgan dancing, she said. I'm not taking it and calling it my own. It's Irish dancing. Right. But if a white person were to engage in African dancing, you'd be losing your fucking mind. Right? She has been a marvel of grace and patience as she bore criticism on social media over a post showing her Irish dancing to hip-hop music, something white Irish dancers have also done. Quick PSA, cultural appropriation is when an element of a specific culture is stolen and renamed without giving any recognition or credit to its origins. An example of this is the Fulani braids being called Bo Derek braids. But that's just it. There are people who have done this. Like, I believe it was just some guy did a video about these two women who were making great burritos, and woke activists had to show up and get the place shut down because they were daring to make Mexican food and they're not Mexican. So again, these rules changed all the time, and so anyway, somehow, of course, this is not cultural appropriation. This is not hurting Irish people. But if the roles were reversed, we know exactly what they would say. It's actually another one of the things that Brittany Cooper brought up, in her video, because she was whining because I guess she does, she's a dance and hip hop studies professor, as if that's a thing. I guess it is, but this is an example of the other direction, which is Black TikTok creators are on strike to protest a lack of credit for their work. Black creators on TikTok are handing out their dancing shoes until further notice, tired of not receiving credit for their creativity and original work, all while watching white influencers rewarded with millions of views performing dances they didn't create. Many Black creators on TikTok joined a widespread strike last week, refusing to create any new dances until credit is given where it's due. And the funny thing is Brittany Cooper, the Black supremacist from The Root that I talked about, who's supposed to be a critical race theory expert, then stated that during this strike on the part of Black creators, no good dances were created. She literally insinuated that no dances worth doing will ever be created unless they're Black people that are making them. I wish I was making this up. That's exactly what the woman said. And apparently, except for Irish River Dance. Anyway, the hashtag Black TikTok strike has been viewed more than 2 million times on TikTok, with users sharing videos of less inspired dances that have popped up in the absence of Black creators. The hashtag has taken off Twitter as well. If you were to check out TikTok video featuring Megan's Three Stallions' latest hit, Thought Something, for example, what you'd find instead was another viral dance challenge by videos by Black creators calling out the lack of credit they receive and raising awareness of the strike. So again, what would happen if Irish river dancers decided to strike until Black girls stopped doing Irish river dance? None of them ever want to talk like that. Again, these rules don't apply in both directions. There is no consistency to what they're doing. They don't care about consistency. They care about, at the end of the day, there is no space for white people or straight people, or cis people or Christian people or whoever their current, enemy is. And that's one of the things I've noticed, because when I've done videos, about what I call strange bedfellows of the left, Muslims are in their group, even though Muslims are completely patriarchal, tend to be xenophobic and racist against non-Muslims in some cases. Somehow, they're accepted in the woke group. All this Israel-Palestine stuff we talked about in one of my earlier videos, wherein, Israelis actually have a lot more, way more gay rights, actually, than they do in Palestine. In fact, Israel has pride parades. But somehow, and the reason I bring that up is that it seems like at the end of the day, whoever organizes all of these intersectional social justice groups has just decided that it's better that they put aside their differences long enough to defeat the evil white cis male straight cis white male, you know. But then I'm sure they'll turn on each other pretty quickly, which is kind of what has already been seen, as they found out when Dearborn Muslims showed up and didn't want their kids being shown genderqueer. You get to watch the woke school board kind of shift uncomfortably because they didn't know what to do. They couldn't tell the Muslims that, you know, that they're wrong, because then they'd be Islamophobic. It's like, anyway. So I'm gonna look here at the chat, see what you guys are seeing here. You know, saying here. I've been kind of focused. So, oh, Cool Frog. Hey, Cool Frog, what's up? So would the Minnesota Vikings also be a team that should change their name? It's funny, as we're going to get into that in a moment. Even though it's literally done for the same reasons. That's why I said earlier, the motive behind picking a mascot is supposed to be that you actually like the thing in question. Like, you feel that the thing in question is strong or good, right? You know, as I've said above, I've been told that that's cultural imperialism. She literally had no choice but to start Irish dance because she was forced by white society. Right. It wouldn't surprise me if that's how they put it. You know, hey, regular Degula's in the building. What's up, bro? You know, funny how blonde hair hats on black women head aren't seen as cultural appropriation. That's an interesting point. Loner Reno says, I don't get you can't use words of a specific culture's argument. If you are referencing a specific word, wouldn't that perpetuate the memes that are associated with that meme? Yeah, I would tend to understand that for sure. You know, but as Regular Degular points out, you know, the rules change all the time because they're dictated by only one group by decree and not by standard. Yeah, not by standard and not by any need to actually be rational or actually make any fucking sense. You know, and as Lucifer the Doberman points out, they eat their own. Yeah, they do. Because after they've kicked all the straight, white, conservative Christian men out of the group, then they need someone else to hate. Otherwise, they lose their fix. You know. So, anyway, let me move on to the next thing I was going to show. I think I actually am almost done with all of this. We can go on to just kind of talking for a little bit. But, oh, that was what it was. So, when they do talk about the idea of removing, say, the Vikings from a school, it's never done under the perspective of trying to be sure that you're not offending any Norwegians. It's always done because if you're going to have a white mascot, you know, then that itself is bad. Not because you're offending any white people, but because white people are bad. You know, so anyway, classes were canceled Tuesday at Washington University after an alleged incident of hate speech on social media that threatened students of color, according to a message the school's president sent to the campus community. The threats came in the midst of a debate at the public university over an initiative to change the school's mascot, Victor E. Viking, an angry-looking helmeted guy whose image has symbolized the school for nearly a century. Some on campus said it could be offensive to non-white students. Others were incredulous or angry about the idea, and the back and forth continued on social media. At some point in the past 48 hours, there were posts on the anonymous social app Yik Yak that included hate speech and threats directed at people of color, said university spokesperson Paul Koch. They're not certain the two are connected, he said, but we're definitely looking into it. Both campus police and the Bellingham, Washington Police Department were investigating. Bruce Shepard, the president, wrote the campus community, "We need the time to press the criminal investigation, to plan how, as a campus, we will come together to demonstrate our outrage, to listen to each other, and to support each other. So I've decided to cancel classes today in order to provide that time." Quote, "Have no doubt this is not a capitulation to those described as trolls and lowlifes. We are going after them." He said there was no threat to the campus generally, but a threat to any one of us is an attack on all of us. You know, so anyway, several colleges have shut down, issued alerts over anonymous threats, some of which, as I pointed out in previous videos, end up being hoaxes by people that are trying to get attention. You know, but anyway, you know, the threats indicate the saturation of anonymous social media on campus, ugliness of some conversations there, and the intensity of racial issues on campus as protests spread nationally. For some students, finding offense in a Viking mascot was an indication that concerns about stereotyping had gone too far. According to the story on Western Front, the campus newspaper, student leaders have proposed changing the mascot after getting a letter from communications study professor Michael Kahlberg that questioned whether the mascot reflected the school's commitment to diversity, our commitment to create a more safe and attractive and inclusive environment on campus. So we can't have a Viking mascot because that's a white guy. Anyway, I think this mascot also reflects a sort of hyper-masculine, hyper-violent sort of image that is doubly problematic. I think we really ought to reconsider. Anyway, a student leader told the Western Front she had concerns that the mascot, quote, did not portray students of color and could seem to exclude them. The problem is if they did pick a fucking mascot that portrayed students of color, they wouldn't be okay with that either. Remember what I said, guys. In this soon to become a genocidal supremacist ideology, there is no room for white people to exist. We can't have a white mascot because it's not a person of color. We can't have a person of color as a mascot because it's a person of color. There's no right answer. You know, another student advocated for Western Ferns as a mascot. We're going to be the Ferns. Can you imagine playing for a football team that's known as the Ferns? Anyway, this tweet says, only at Western would there be a petition to change the mascot from a Viking to a Fern because they're less violent and more diverse. Who identifies with ferns? That reminds me of like the whole Marvel mascot Marvel character option. Like, you need to have characters that look like you. Who identifies with Groot? Houseplants. Were we trying to ensure that houseplants felt included? Anyway, one student leader tweeted that there had been a popular reaction among students saying the Viking was a positive representation of their students and urged people to contribute to the debate. Someone else posted, quote, Western students voted to use the Viking as their mascot in 1923, the same year the KKK was established in Bellingham. Coincidence? Oh my God. What the fuck? So it's a KKK plot. That's what it is. Anyway, another wrote, today in the news, Westerners consider changing the mascot from Viking to multiracial transgender stoner. More at 11. Anyway, several student leaders did not immediately respond to requests for comment from the post. Two referred questions to a university spokesperson. Members of the Black Student Union at Western did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the post. They had a warning posted online. Hi, y'all. Classes have been canceled today due to hate speech on social media. It is currently being investigated and campus is still operating, but please stay off of campus as threats have been made directly towards certain Black folks and larger students of color population at Western. Stay safe. In a blog post Sunday, Western's president wrote that he didn't think it was likely the university would change its mascot. Shepard mulled the arguments. In response to what he had said was a common concern that Vikings look sinister and evil, and white, of course. He broke down the difference between university mascots and sports mascots. Decades ago, I was at Oregon State University and was part of the discussion of the mascot, a warm, cuddly beaver. The athletic program wanted a mean, vicious-looking varmint to put on the side of the football helmets. Hard to imagine how to make a beaver look evil, but graphic artists are talented. The athletics department got a mean beaver. The university kept the cute one. He considered the arguments that Viking history and culture is long distinguished by great literature, art, poetry, and inventiveness, and also that the culture had, like many others, ours prominently included, gone through some dark times of violent conquest, enslaving, and the like. He said the most serious question at the brink of the turning point in both higher education and society at large is, does a Eurocentric and male mascot point in the future we wish to embrace, or to the past we would move beyond? Well, I mean, don't worry. What they'll do is they'll just convince people to make a black Viking queen in the Viking TV show, and then it's all good, right? Again, another one of those examples about how cultural appropriation doesn't go in both directions. It was fine to make a black, African woman somehow a Viking queen, but it was not okay to, it's never okay to go in the other direction. But anyway, so the answer to your question, Cool Frog, is should the Minnesota Vikings change their name? And the answer would be yes, but not because they care about offending any Norwegians, but because we can't have any masculine, tough-looking white guys as our symbol. Because they don't want masculine, tough-looking white guys to be a thing, right? That's the way, the backwards way that these people go about thinking about this, and this, of course, yeah, Mean Beaver has the clap, right? Would you like to have a beaver? It's like, well, everybody would like to have a beaver, right, as their symbol. That's a women's empowerment symbol. Maybe we should have a beaver. Anyway, yeah, Vikings are supposed to be white, theoretically, Cool Frog, but apparently not black, right? Well, or are they? I still can't believe that they did this, But um, let me see what we got here. R.A.P. Levy Walker Jr., aka Chief Nakahoma, the only real native to portray the Atlanta Braves mascot, who passed away a week ago. Oh, that's too bad. And that kind of comes back to like what people were saying earlier, was that they felt that that they were represented in a positive way, by all of this. I thought I had one more clip I wanted to play. Let me see if I can find it. No, it doesn't look like I did. That's all right. I played a lot of them, but anyway, all right. So I had a video that I had done on this topic from a while ago, and it was interesting because, that was one of the things. It was in a video clip that I have now lost, apparently. But one of the guys brought up that the reason that the Redskins were named the Redskins was because of the fact that there were Native American members on the team at the time that they founded it, like way back in the 20s. So it was meant to honor the other Native Americans that were on their team. Like, little pieces of Redskin history that nobody talked about, and again, it comes back to like what I've been maintaining this whole time. They want to honor the spirit of a powerful war chief. That's not something you do, to symbolize yourself. Like, what do you want to identify with? What do you want to identify as? Essentially, to be the totem, so to speak, of the spirit of your team, right? So anyway, let me bring up this Celtics video I did a while ago. And it was really ironic because you get to watch Sean King on his face as per typical, and then I'll be taking some questions from the audience, and then we'll probably be done. I've been at this for a while today. Hope you guys have enjoyed our stream so far. I think that I've had a fun time talking today. And I hope that you guys, appreciate the work that we do here at V Radio. If you want to support me on Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, you can do all that at hy.page/V Radio. And yes, Talcum X, Tennessee Tricycles, you're going to like it. Let me pull this up because this is a video I did a while ago, because this incident happened at a Celtics game, and this guy just, and per typical, he goes on a crazy rant, so here we go. One sec. So Black Lives Matter activist and professional race baiter Sean King decided to weigh in on a recent incident that took place at a basketball game. I'm going to get into what happened with the basketball game in a little bit, but it's my intention also to discuss the issue of sports logos in general, particularly when it comes to racism. Anyway, but let me get first of all to what it is that he said that led to me going ahead and making this. Y'all not ready to talk about how no team in American sports is built more around whiteness itself than the Boston Celtics. Their logo is literally a white man, like the whitest white man you can imagine. Their name, the Celtics, is based on what you call a certain group of Europeans. And white people in Boston have always thought of the team as their team. They hate Kyrie for rejecting it and rejecting them. So, first let me get this out of the way. I do believe that there can be, perhaps some framing when it comes to sports logos and mascots, that should be addressed. But there's also the issue of the motive. The first of which is that people take a mascot generally because they're trying to honor or pay homage to some form of exceptional, qualities. The Minnesota Vikings didn't name themselves, the Vikings for no reason. Vikings are known to be, like an ancient warrior culture, really tough, good name for a football team. I do think that, the Redskins and the Chiefs, there's definitely two poor, not good choices basically for for sports teams. But in contrast, there was actually a college, or it might have been a high school, that had their sports collective named the Huron, and it was actually in tribute to the tribe, the Huron. And a lot of virtue signaling people on their council decided that they needed to remove that. Even when an actual chief of the Huron said, no, that's fine, that honors us. People don't name their sports teams after things that they think are inferior. Nobody names themselves the Daisies. you know, nobody names themselves, anything that they don't, feel has some form of admirable trait. The reason that there's a problem with the Redskins and the Chiefs is that both of those terms have been just like flat out used as racial slurs. If they wanted to use the semblance or the image of a Native American warrior, that's a different matter as long as it's a name that's not, just directly used that way. But regardless, one of the things I wanted to kind of bring to the attention of people is like, so the logo for the Boston Celtics is a leprechaun. And the reason that it's a leprechaun is because Boston is a historically Irish community. And it was never like, when he says their logo is literally a white man, the whitest white man you could imagine, as if implying that the Boston Celtics picked this logo out of like white supremacy, like to demonstrate, that this was white supremacy. One of the big problems that I have that, with racial activism in general is they present white people as a monolith. All white people are the same. All white people are accountable for the same things. And frequently I also hear, certain of the more hateful activists, racial activists saying things like white people don't have any culture, which is why they have to steal ours. That's supposedly the story behind cultural appropriation. And it's bullshit. There actually are a large number of cultures. I remember, that basically would be Caucasian, and that's why he says, their name, the Celtics, is based on what you call a certain group of Europeans. No, they're a culture. But it's one of the things I've noticed a lot is that, people don't really seem to take any interest whatsoever in cultural appropriation unless they feel it's offending people of color. You can just do whatever the hell you want with any white culture and nobody cares. Even if it would be offensive to anybody. So, for example, suggesting that, that Lucky, as he's known, the mascot for the Celtics, is just the whitest white man, would imply that that was their point, was to suggest that they picked this guy as their logo and their mascot specifically to try to demonstrate whiteness. And that's just bullshit. That's not it at all. So there were some people, thankfully, actually, oddly enough, a lot of people of color responded to Sean on here to talk about how basically how long of a reach this was on his part to make this suggestion. Not just about the logo, but about the idea that the Celtics itself is built around whiteness. So anyway, let's take a look at those comments. TJ Wenzel says, bro, be careful. You're going to pull a muscle with this reach. Then Damian Gordon says, have you heard of what black players have said about the fans in Boston? So Sheet Allen says, what have they said about the organization, though? Sean didn't take his anger out on the fans. He took it out on the organization. There is a huge difference between the two. Speaking from a black man and documentarian, you are factually incorrect. This city has a bad history of racism, true. However, the Celtics have been the most progressive team in the NBA. Another person points out, you can come for the fans, but not the organization. Do your research, Sean King. This team broke the color barrier for Africans to play and coach in the NBA. They were the first to do both. A lot of these kinds of facts have been brought to light in this thread, including the fact that the Celtics actually drafted the first black player. They had the first black coach, as was just pointed out. At one point, they had the first team to have an entirely black starting lineup. So, yeah, I would say that I would agree with them, that the notion that, the entire team is just founded on white supremacy is just fucking stupid. So here's a photo of the man who threw a water bottle at the player in question. The player's name is Kyrie Irving. And this is him being taken away by police. Now, I'd like you to make a note of the name and the number on the back of his jersey, as it's going to be relevant later. Everybody was talking about this as if it was just a racist incident, and really not discussing the full
dynamics of what was going on. And Sean King, for example, obviously left this kind of information out. Now, I want to be clear. I can't think of any reason why a fan would be justified in throwing a bottle at somebody, but acting like it was for no reason is just dishonest. And people seizing on this idea as if it was a racist incident, it's just obviously bullshit. So there you just saw him go out of his way to walk past other players, specifically to go to the center and step on Lucky, the mascot for the Boston Celtics, the whiter than white man than you could possibly imagine. And then, wipe his feet on it, or wipe his foot on it. He was making a statement. It was a very intentional point. That's another thing that a lot of people don't know all the facts, are just saying, well, who cares if he stepped on his logo? I mean, it's on the floor. Everybody steps on it. No, he knew what he was doing, and he did that to make a point to the fans that, that basically that he was disrespecting them. So, again, I was talking to you earlier about this jersey and the number on it. When people suggest that this was a racially motivated incident, let's talk a little bit about why this particular fan was wearing this jersey. You may notice a certain detail about the original person to wear this jersey that may make you question whether or not this was a racist incident. So this is the player that the individual who threw the water bottle was honoring by wearing his jersey. His name is Kevin Garnett. He's an NBA legend, NBA Hall of Famer, and obviously a Boston Celtic. So I think you might be reaching pretty damn far to suggest that this was just a racial incident. But, who knows? So, also, ironically, Mr. Garnett weighed in on the topic of Kyrie Irving's behavior with regard to the logo. So nobody gonna say anything about Kyrie stomping on Lucky? We just gonna act like we didn't see that? What the fuck is going on? You can't do that. That's not cool, at no level. All of us need to be better. I'm just saying. Good morning to all and have a great, happy Memorial Day. So here we, inconveniently for the narrative, have an African-American NBA legend coming forward to say that it was inappropriate for him to, basically disrespect the logo of the Boston Celtics. And rather ironically, that just happens to be, this just happens to be the same player whose jersey was on the fellow who threw the water bottle. I've read a lot of other angry reactions from different from different fans about what he did. And again, I don't feel it justifies throwing a water bottle at anybody, but to act like, it's just the most preposterous thing in the world that anybody might take that personally, he wanted it to be taken personally. That's why he did it. So getting back to the post that started all of this, it's interesting that once again, the people who more or less make a living on professional race baiting felt the need to try to turn this into a racial issue. But there were plenty of fans in Boston who are also people of color who didn't take kindly to what happened. I also watched a video, I almost included it, from one YouTuber who happened to be African American, who literally said he wished he had actually struck him with the bottle. That he had lost all respect for, this player for doing this. So, regardless, there's a need to try to make everything into a racial incident, even if there's no rationale behind that. The other thing that's a little disturbing about this was like the notion that, okay, so we can't have logos that are literal white men. What's the problem with that? So does that mean that, the Viking logo that also happens to be a white man needs to be taken down? Are we, at what point exactly are we ever allowed to take any pride in any of our cultures? Which is another thing I plan to do a video about later. If, we need to dismantle this notion again, like I said earlier, that white people are a monolith that should all be judged accordingly, based on everything that every Caucasian has ever done, despite the fact that white people come in a large group of vastly different cultures, or as this idiot put it, certain groups of Europeans, whatever the hell that means. Predictably, he, also went out of his way to go ahead and make this a racial issue. And by he, I mean, Irving himself.
Fortunate, that sports has come to a lot of this, kind of crossroads where you're seeing a lot of old ways come up. It's been part of that. It's been that way in history in terms of entertainment and performers in sports for a long period of time, of just underlying racism and just treating people like they're in a human zoo. Throwing stuff at people, saying things. There's a certain point where it just gets to be too much. So, I called it out. I just wanted to keep it strictly basketball, and then you just see that people just feel very entitled out here. They pay for the tickets, great. I'm grateful that they're coming in to watch a great performance, but it's just, we're not at the theater. We're not throwing tomatoes and other random stuff at the people that are performing. It's too much.
So it couldn't be his behavior. It, of course, had to be racism. Couldn't have anything to do with him going out of his way to disrespect the Boston fans in their home, arena. It has to be racism. I guess let's hear what this fan has to say.
Kyrie Irving will play in front of Celtics fans in TD Garden for the first time tonight as a Brooklyn Net. Just days ago, he made waves by referencing alleged racist behavior he said he experienced from Boston fans at TD Garden in the past. I talked to Celtics fans before the game.
He was a bad leader while he was here. He quit on us while he was here. He made false promises. And I have other words that probably aren't as TV friendly. I don't think you can ignore the history around race in Boston. I also think he's collapsing two different conversations together. So he said when I was a player here, he had never experienced it himself. I think it's heightened around the league, just given everything that's gone on. It's something that shouldn't be dismissed. And I also think that's very Kyrie of him to try and change the discourse and change the narrative.
So there you had a person of color voicing basically the same kind of animus, in a very, civilized and even-handed way, in regards to that. And it is interesting that all of a sudden the problem was racism when, as that fan pointed out, Mr. Irving never complained about racism while he was in Boston, and even said that he had not encountered it. But when he needs a convenient way to go from being an asshole to being a hero, diving under the race card is a great way to go about it. So again, this is just another example of people needing to go out of their way to make something about race that's not about race. It's about somebody's shitty behavior. And mind you, once again, throwing water bottles at people is not justified. But, when you look further at Sean's posts on this topic, you get to see how he blows everything up. My God, I'm furious. This is out of control. A Celtics fan threw a water bottle right at Kyrie Irving's head as he left the court. The players are clearly not safe. We've had more black players and their families attacked in the past week than any week in modern NBA history. It's disgusting, and the NBA and these teams are simply not doing enough about it. Period. It's getting worse. And at its root, it's bigotry and white supremacy. We are literally 6 months out of white people literally storming the Capitol. It's all connected. White Americans are angry and insecure and want to show rich black men how they feel about it. If white fans, particularly in Boston, are having any problems with insecurity, all you have to do is Google the name Larry Bird and watch a good 20 minutes of him beating the dog snot out of everybody on the court. That'll solve any insecurity you have. Although I personally don't judge my, as far as who I'm fans with in any sport based on their race, because I don't bring race into absolutely everything. But anyway, so be aware of people like this. He's basically, again, he's a professional race baiter. This is what he does. And, again, the notion that this logo is just, hands-on white supremacy, and then the Boston Celtics are supposedly, built on, racism and white supremacy is just horse shit. Thanks for listening.
All right, guys. So that was me sharing an older video I had done about that incident where Talcum X, as you guys called him, needed to jump all over the Celtics. And then it was actually African American fans who set him straight. You know, that point of fact, the Boston Celtics was the first team to draft a black player. Point of fact, the Boston Celtics was the first team to ever field an entirely black squad. Point of fact, the Boston Celtics was the first team to ever have a black coach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, but don't let a little thing like the facts get in your way, especially if you're a race gift grifter like Sean King, because as actual Justice Warrior always points out, the demand for racism always outstrips the supply. So anyway, bringing this back around to the original thing about this, to suggest that the kid was somehow trying to portray black and red people somehow at the same time in a negative light just makes no sense. Not everybody who colors themselves black is trying to in any way hint at or suggest that someone is African. You know, there are other uses for the color black. Like, the funny thing is in Dungeons and Dragons and in LARPing, there's this big problem right now with dark elves being portrayed as black. And the funny thing is, if you know anything about the drow dark elves from Dungeons and Dragons, they're not in any way meant to be similar to or even suggested to be close to Africans in any capacity. The drow culture and look and everything, it doesn't look anything like an African. You would never look at somebody portraying that and think to yourself that that person's trying to be African. But that's just another example of how people who go into everything with race consciousness cannot help themselves but find it under literally every rock. So yeah, I agree, Lath. Driz should have his own movie. But how would you even portray it now? Like R.A. Salvatore, the author, is trying to figure out ways of handling it, because the idea that they're portraying that the dark, elf race are always evil is a problem. And I have no problem with there being dark elves of other backgrounds. It's just crazy to suggest, because, Drizzt is such an amazing character, and it ended up leading to people wanting to play dark elves. It led to people wanting to portray their character like that pitch black skin that doesn't even exist on humans in the first place. But anyway, so again, Monday night at 10, I will be interviewing Kyle Rittenhouse's sister, Faith, again. I've been given a kind of advanced working copy of Kyle's book, and it's not good. He talks a lot about the personal life of his family, the sex lives of his sisters and of his mother, just trashes all over his family. And Johnny Walker Dredd approached me to be able to bring Faith back on our shows, to be able to give her a voice to kind of speak out about some of the negative portrayals of Kyle's family that he's putting in his own book. And it's really too bad. But that's coming up on Monday at 10. Make sure that you guys get a chance to tune in, because unfortunately, it looks like Kyle's fame and money has gotten to his head. I've talked to his family. I've talked to Dominic Black. And Photo Chad's not happy about it, and Grambo's not happy about what's going on. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of us were always worried. And if you remember what Mark Richards said, like towards the end when they were interviewing him, that Kyle needed to learn how to tell some of these people no, and needed to be careful about what kind of people he was surrounding himself with. Well, I think that's come to fruition, because his family was there for him through all of that nonsense. And now, because he wants to sell a book, it's like he's putting all these sordid details about their lives in it that are just not true. And so 10 o'clock Eastern time on Monday night, I will be bringing Faith Rittenhouse on again. We're going to talk about having Citizen Ann, also known as Grambo, on, as well as Photo Chad, to discuss these things. And, if there's any topics you guys want me to cover, let me know. Like I said, things have been pretty rough in my life lately, so it's been harder to be able to just, to put together content. It takes a lot of work. And I really try to not do this unless I can come on and give you guys the kind of quality and clarity of thought that is what you have come to expect from me. Not doing well financially right now either. Something happened where Social Security sent me money and said, "Hey, we owe you extra money." And I went, "Oh, okay." And then I used it to fix my car, and I used it to help build the railing in front of my house along with the money that Winning Reality, had raised for me. And I thought, "Okay, well, I'm good. This is great." And then a couple months later, Social Security sends me a letter and says, "Hey, we were not supposed to give you that money. So coming up, you're not going to get any money for 1 month." And that threw me into total turmoil. Like that destroyed me financially. And I need to figure out a way to paddle back up. So I have a few Patreon supporters left. I haven't been pushing it as hard because when I was financially stable, I didn't want anyone's money. And also, like during the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing, I had people asking me where they could donate to my efforts, and I kept telling them, "Don't donate to me, donate to the Kyle Rittenhouse Legal Fund." But if you can help, you can support me on Patreon, you can support me on PayPal, you can support me on Subscribestar. If you prefer Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, all that stuff, I have all of it. Just feel free to reach out. But the ones that you can definitely grab are the ones on hy.page/vradio, which I'm going to pull up again. If you guys have not been to my HY page, it is a central hub, so to speak, for where you can find all of my various mediums because I re-upload, although I'm a little bit behind on BitChute right now. But all of my stuff gets auto uploaded to both Odyssey and to Rumble. I don't go live there because it creates like new versions of like I would end up with all these doubles of my shows if I went live on Rumble. But I know that it's just a matter of time, before my channel is going to run into problems because they deleted Neo Unrealist. He's now exclusively on Rumble. Unfortunately, I would just go over there, but it's really hard to build an audience on Rumble because they apparently just don't have an algorithm. So unless you kind of already had attention, it's really hard to build an audience there. Same thing with Odyssey. But if you come here to hy.page/vradio, I've never used this email list thing, but apparently it's on there. You can email me through it though. And then this link takes you to the Anchor thing where you can find me in a lot of different podcasting formats. I have a Facebook group that I always do an at everyone when I'm going live just to notify you guys. I'm on Twitter, obviously, or X or whatever we're calling it today. You can find the links to my Patreon, PayPal, and Subscribestar here. You can join my Telegram channel. I also always post new links whenever I put out new content on Telegram. And you can join our Discord channel. I have a Getter account. I haven't really done anything with it. I had a Kick account too, and I still do. I just don't use it very much because Kick wants you to set up everything every single time. So I can't just click one button. And I do have a TikTok channel where I throw, like when I make a YouTube short, I'll just stick it on TikTok for the hell of it. But you guys should come here and do all of this because it's the best way to be sure you always get my stuff. Even if I do get deleted from YouTube, I'm not going to stop. I look at things a lot differently than other people, when it comes to that stuff. 17 people are listening to me right now. If 17 people were sitting in my house right now listening to me, that's actually a significant number of people. If my average views are between 500 to 600, that's like a full auditorium of people who chose to tune into my stuff. So it's easy to kind of forget the scale of things. And that's why I'll keep doing it. Regardless, but just make sure that you can come find me because, well, obviously I like to be financially compensated for my work. It's not my main motivation in doing this, or I'd be doing content that was much more exclusively in one tribe's or the other's ballywick. And that's how most of these people get all of these subscribers, is they're going to tell people what they want to hear. I don't always do that here. My channel back in the day was like that. And I do have a lot of people that used to listen to my podcast who don't anymore because I'm not exclusively pushing an only left-wing, curated thing all the time. But that's because I approach things in a way similar to Glenn Greenwald, and that led to everybody saying that he was far right. But he's recently been calling out a lot of right-wing people who are strangely becoming pro-war now that it's Israel, and I still think that Israel has a right to defend themselves. I'll get into that at another point. My biggest video that I did about it was just debunking the crazy, strange bedfellows that the LGBTQ community is doing queers for Palestine, when if they ever showed up in Palestine, they'd be doing queers jumping off of buildings in Palestine, because that's what happens. Anyway. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. Make sure, that's another thing, you can join our Discord. We have a lot of lively conversations. And in the Discord, there are people of different political views. The main rule is just that you can't engage in personal attack. Obviously, we don't, do spam and stuff like that. But the main reason why I have that rule is that if you allow personal attack, it becomes its own form of censorship, because people just stop participating if they don't want to deal with that. And it also just clouds everything. We don't get to have any kind of real exchanges if we're always in personal attack. It's like, there were people bitching on a Facebook group I'm in because a lot of people are using anonymous posting, and people don't understand why anyone would want to do that, or like they get irritated with it. I'm like, well, when you consider the fact that the first reaction of anyone you're arguing with is to immediately, if you start to lose the argument, run over to that person's profile and find out some personal aspect about them, some personal thing about them, so that you can then drag that into the conversation. Like, we could be arguing about, say, a traffic law, back and forth about whether or not a traffic law should exist. And you start getting your ass kicked. So you run off to my Facebook profile to find out, oh, well, he's fat, or, look at his car, it's all broken up, or, like you go like, well, looking at your profile, you're a fat guy. Why would I talk to you about traffic laws? That's why they do this. It's just, it's a weak-minded way to engage in conversation. If you are reliant on personal attack, your objective at that point is to try to, it's mostly for the audience. You're trying to denigrate your opponent in the debate in the audience, so the audience won't take that person seriously. It's usually an act of desperation, because you know that your opponent is right. And in some cases, just to lash out of frustration. But again, it doesn't change anything. Nobody comes around your way of thinking. And unfortunately, activism is no longer about that. It's not about being effective. It's about making yourself feel good. And I think I'll close off this video with showing, one of my favorite videos on this topic. Again, I've played it many times. This is an old John Cleese clip. And the funny thing about it is, that this was made years ago, pre-internet, and it's even more appropriate than it ever was before.
Seriously, though, we've heard a lot about extremism recently, a nastier, harsher atmosphere everywhere, more abuse and bother boy behavior, less friendliness and tolerance and respect for opponents. All right, but what we never hear about extremism is its advantages. Well, the biggest advantage of extremism is that it makes you feel good, because it provides you with enemies. Let me explain. The great thing about having enemies is that you can pretend that all the badness in the whole world is in your enemies, and all the goodness in the whole world is in you. Attractive, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of anger and resentment in you anyway, and you therefore enjoy abusing people, then you can pretend that you're only doing it because these enemies of yours are such very bad persons. And that if it wasn't for them, you'd actually be good-natured and courteous and rational all the time. So, if you want to feel good, become an extremist. Okay, now you have a choice. If you join the hard left, they'll give you their list of authorized enemies. Almost all kinds of authority, especially the police, the city, Americans, judges, multinational corporations, public schools, furriers, newspaper owners, fox hunters, generals, class traitors, and, of course, moderates. Or, if you'd rather be an extremist on the hard right, no problem, fine, you still get a lovely list of enemies, only they're different ones. Noisy minority groups, unions, Russia, weirdos, demonstrators, welfare sponges, meddlesome clergy, peaceniks, the BBC, strikers, social workers, communists, and, of course, moderates. And upstart actors. Now, once you're armed with one of these super lists of enemies, you can be as nasty as you like and yet feel your behaviors morally justified. So you can strut around abusing people and telling them you could eat them for breakfast and still think of yourself as a champion of the truth, a fighter for the greater good, and not the rather sad paranoid schizoid that you really are.
Isn't it funny how stuff like that can change? Because he listed Russia as an enemy of the right wing, and they used to be, right? But now it's Russia, Russia, Russia. But on the part of the Democrats and the left, everything's a Russian conspiracy theory. What my favorite part about that is when they say that the Russians meddled in the 2016 election. How did they do that? Allegedly, Russian hackers revealed that the Democratic Party had rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. So that's meddling. Meddling was telling the truth about what happened in the Democratic primary. To be honest with you, whining about that is about as pathetic as a Scooby-Doo villain going, and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling kids. Thanks, guys. I'm tuning out. Welcome, and once again, thank you for coming to this episode of V Radio, and I hope to see you guys Monday night at 10 p.m.